This is devastating as we have a brutal injury update on one of the Cowboys' wide receivers that was poised to make the 53-man roster. Now, this has some major implications on the wide receiver room and the Cowboys' injured reserve space. We'll tell you all the latest right here on Cowboys Digest. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jace Andrews. I appreciate you tuning into the show. Wish it was some better news, but before that, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We noticed that 81% of you who watch these videos are not yet subscribed, so do me a favor, go down there, click that subscribe button. It's 100% free, and you'll be joining one of the fastest growing Cowboys channels on YouTube. The report came from Adam Schefter early this morning. Technically, it was last night if you want to go that deep, but Adam Schefter said this: Cowboys wide receiver Jonathan Mingo is likely to start the season on injured reserve because of a sprained posterior cruciate ligament in his right knee suffered in last week's preseason game against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, we're going to go in full detail about this injury breakdown, when he could be back, the recovery time, and what this means for the wide receiver room going forward. Obviously, in a lot of 53-man projections, Jonathan Mingo was slated to make that one. Now, if he's going to be on injured reserve, that opens up a spot for somebody else, maybe like a Trevon Holmes. Maybe if Jalen Brooks wasn't going to make the roster in some of these projections, he can now make it. So a bunch of different guys that really now have a choice, or a chance, I should say, to jump into that 53-man roster. We'll talk about it all. Let's go into the story, though, from Todd Archer. He says, quote, Mingo suffered the injury on a 49-yard reception down the sideline in the third quarter. He was targeted on the next play and limped to the sideline before heading to the medical tent. He was immediately ruled out, end quote. Now, if you watch the preseason game, you could tell that after that catch, he didn't exactly look right. He didn't seem to be in the right mindset, and obviously when he was targeted on the next play, you could tell that there was just something off. He got taken out, immediately ruled out, especially in preseason. I almost wish he would have just gone out after that first play. I'm not to say that the second one was the one that really caused the injury, but obviously when you're injured, you don't want to try and keep going. So as we take a look at the offensive depth chart, the wide receiver room had a interesting characteristic to it to see who exactly was going to make the 53-man roster. Obviously, Jalen Tolbert, CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, those guys felt like locks. Past that, it was a bit of a question mark, but in a lot of 53-man projections, we saw Kevontae Turpin and Jonathan Mingo being the other two wide receivers. So in this situation, we've talked a lot about Trevon Holden. I've loved exactly what we've seen from him in the in training camp. I think he could be a pretty good fit. Ryan Flournoy could also maybe jump in that spot, but I personally think the most likely to take the spot is Jalen Brooks. I think Holden will probably get a practice squad offer, so I'm upset about the injury because, honestly, obviously you trade for him last year from Carolina. He never exactly got to play with Dak Prescott, which we'll talk more about in a second, but now he's not going to get a second season with you. It's not going to be an extra wide receiver on the depth chart. I'm not going to say this is going to, change the dynamic of the offense, but with him going to injured reserve, that also creates for a little bit of a logistical problem in a couple of different lights. And last season, again, he didn't exactly get the time that we wanted him to have. 17 games, obviously that was split between the Carolina Panthers and the Dallas Cowboys. Had 40 targets, just 17 receptions on 172 yards, just 6 first downs. Nothing exactly crazy for him, but obviously you have to go back more deeper into the stat sheet here. And you can see his first season with Carolina, a pretty good one. 4-18, 15 games, 43 receptions. And of course, last season, kind of combining the two, wasn't a great year. 46 yards with the Dallas Cowboys in 8 games on 16 targets. 9.2 average is, okay. I think the bigger thing to me was he never got to play with Dak Prescott, and that was something that we were hopefully liking to, hopefully see. We go continuing more into Todd Archer's story of ESPN saying, quote, last year the Cowboys acquired Mingo and a 7th-round pick in 2025 for a 2025 4th-rounder from the Carolina Panthers. In 8 games, he caught 5 passes for 46 yards, but he did not have a reception from starting quarterback Dak Prescott, who missed the final 9 games in 2024 because of a hamstring avulsion that required surgery, end quote. And I'm very excited for this offensive season. I think Brian Schottenheimer has talked about how different the offense is going to be this season, how they're going to be able to use it in different lights, have, a wildcat formation. They've talked about having Kevontae Turpin as a running back, kind of like a Deebo Samuel type player. And I think that in some ways, Jonathan Mingo, as athletic as he is, could be a perfect fit for that. And I was really excited to see him because I do think he was going to make the 53-man roster. And I think the Cowboys have a very good amount of good wide receivers, so obviously it's something that, they can definitely be on top of, but like I said, this was a projection we got yesterday from the New York Times talking about the wide receiver room for the Dallas Cowboys, and you can see it was CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, Jalen Tolbert, Kevontae Turpin, and Jonathan Mingo. So now with his injury, he's going to be on the IR, and there's a bunch of questions. I do want to kind of go back here and really talk about some guys they mentioned on here who could maybe get on that number 6 spot, and they kind of have it here, middle of the article. It says, there have been days recently where Jalen Brooks, Ryan Flournoy, and Jalen Cropper could make an argument for that number 6 spot, but it's very possible that Dallas goes with only 5 here, and it's unlikely that any of those 4 would jump any of the 5 listed below. And while I do kind of understand that, I believe that Brooks and Holden actually now have a shot not only to make the 53-man roster, obviously, with the Mingo injury, but a chance for maybe both of them to make it, because when you have Mingo, you maybe think there's a little bit more depth there. Not to say that, Holden or Brooks aren't as good, but you had the trust in Mingo. You were going to put him on the roster. At least that was the projection. Now, if you don't have him, are you willing to sacrifice an extra roster spot in a wide receiver room that you know is going to be good, but you'd like to have that 5th guy, and you don't know who it's going to be just yet, if it's Brooks, if it's Flournoy? I mean, there's a couple of guys in there, and I think this Friday's preseason game will probably tell us a lot about what to expect for the Dallas Cowboys in this upcoming 53-man roster. I know that against the Falcons and the potential for Dak Prescott to finally play in the preseason is there, but I think the bigger thing to watch is a couple of different positions. The cornerback room, obviously getting a signing yesterday with O.J. Medea, and then you have, of course, the wide receiver room where you're looking at a bunch of different guys. The running back room is interesting, and I'm not going to say I don't like the plain vanilla play of Brian Schottenheimer in the first 2 preseason games. Obviously, with the injuries the Dallas Cowboys have already accumulated, I don't want them to be injured any more than they already were. But there is a talk about injured reserve space, and that's where we go back to the article from Todd Archer. He says, quote, the Cowboys can place 2 players on injured reserve / designated to return at the time of finalizing their 53-man roster on August 26th. By the way, mark that date down. That's going to be a huge date, and we want you to come and join us here. We'll have the 53-man roster breakdown. Without the designation, the player would have to be on the 53-man roster for 1 day before heading to injured reserve. So with that being said, there's a couple of different options. And right now, on injured reserve, there's a couple of different guys that could be there. I know Robert Jones, he's going to be on the injured reserve list, but more for a season ending, so not going to look at him. But there is guys like Siobhan Revel Jr., who it seems like he's not going to be ready for week 1. In that case, being a rookie, would you rather just put him on IR and not have to worry about him for 4 weeks? Same can be said. I don't think I want this to happen. I don't think it will. But Trevon Diggs, the quarterback room is a bit beat up. There's a potential for him to be there. So there is a bunch of guys in that IR slot. Now Jonathan Mingo has to take a spot as well. So there's 2 places the Cowboys can go with this. The first one is that they just are able to put Mingo on the IR, and they can add Trevon Diggs, knowing that he can, come back in week 2 or not have to play him that much seldomly in week 1 and be fine in week 2 or whatever that might look like. But the other option, if we go back to the quote here, he mentions in the bottom of this quote saying, the designated player would have to be on the 53-man roster for 1 day before heading to the injured reserve. So there is a way to work around this if you want Trayshawn Holden and Jalen Brooks to both make the roster here. The first option is you have Jonathan Mingo on the 53-man roster. He's there for that 1 day, and you can put Holden or Brooks on the practice squad. Could be scooped up by other people, could be signed. There's a bunch of different options there. Or you could also try and just put both of them on the roster. You'd have 7 wide receivers and practice squad somebody else that maybe you think is not going to be able to get taken. Then once the IR slot is taken and put on to Jonathan Mingo, you can then bring up somebody from the practice squad. There's a couple of different options. Obviously, given now that the situation is already in place, Mingo is going to have to be on the IR either to start the season or 1 day after the 53-man roster comes out. It's a decision that Jerry Jones and Coach Schottenheimer, they're going to have to figure out. If you were to ask me, I'm probably saying the most likely situation here is that they are going to put all 3 wide receivers that they want, or all 2 wide receivers if it's Mingo and Brooks, if it's Mingo and Holden, if it's Mingo, Brooks, and Holden. I think they put all of them on the roster. Practice squad, somebody else. Once they get Mingo that IR slot a day after, they can bring up whoever that is off the practice squad, put them onto an official roster spot. My bet would be a cornerback that maybe they have seen some good things from, and don't believe that the rest of the NFL has seen that, because given Holden and the way he's been looking and some of the wide receiver rooms in the NFL not looking too good, there's a chance you miss that 53-man roster, and in that day, he can be picked up by, no practice squad, he can be taken off by somebody else and put on their 53-man roster. So it's a very interesting day on August 26th as you finalize rosters, as you kind of go through everything. And now, of course, this added just another kind of clogging in the machine, trying to figure out what to do with all these injuries for the Cowboys and what to do with the wide receiver room. So kind of last question here. Who do you think ends up on the 53-man roster in terms of a wide receiver designation? I know that CeeDee Lamb, Pickens, Tolbert, Turpin, I think they're pretty much locks with those four. But past that, do you like Trayshawn Horn enough for him to have a roster spot? Do you think Jalen Brooks is good enough to be a roster spot? Is Flournoy going to be enough to make a roster spot? Let me know down in the comment section what you think about all of this. Obviously, we'll keep you up to date and make sure you're understanding of everything. We'll have a live stream on Friday for the Falcons and Cowboys game, last one of the preseason. So we hope you stop by, join us, and hang out with us during the game. We're going to be doing some live play, watching and having fun, talking ball. So we appreciate every single one of you watching today's video. We'll see you next time here on Cowboys Digest. Peace out, guys.